Hello and welcome to episode 74 of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us at the Page One podcast, where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process, how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips as possible. We have had a great season. This is episode 10 of season 7, I think.
Who'd have thought we would still be here 7 seasons in?
Exactly.
Still going strong. Take that, Game of Thrones.
And with more to come as well, exactly.
Absolutely. This is only the end of Act 1.
And we've had some great guests on this season already, people like Charlie Jane Anders, Jeff Vandermeer, David Nichols. So, do have a look at the back catalogue. I'm sure there'll be some people you want to hear from. But we've got another great guest this week. We
do have a great guest this week. We're chatting with Holly Seddon, who her debut novel was Try Not to Breathe, which came out in 2016. It was quite a big hit actually for her. It was very talked about by people like Marion Keyes. Very exciting. Mm-hmm. She then followed up with Don't Close Your Eyes, and then Love Will Tear Us Apart. And her newest book is The Hit List, which was out in ebook form August 2020 last year, and it's just come out in April 2021 on paperback. Very exciting.
And you can go and get that in your bookshop now, of course.
I actually popped into a bookshop yesterday for the first time in
Excellent.
a long time. Yeah, it was very strange, but very nice to be back. So I would highly recommend people go to the local bookshop and check out The Hit List.
Yep. And we chat to her about, how she got an agent. She's got quite an interesting story about that. Perhaps the quickest ever.
I think it might be a Guinness World Record.
Yeah, exactly. And changing agents, and talk about her writing process and the use of programs like Scrivener to help her plan out her novels. So it's a great episode, so we'll get straight into it after a quick advert for our Page One notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page One.
Did you always want to be a writer?
Yes. Yeah. From pretty much as far back as I can remember. I remember my mum going into hospital to have my little sister when I was nearly 4, and I spent the time writing it. I mean, typical attention-seeking older sibling behaviour. Presented her with a little book when she came out, knackered. Yeah, I remember.
By the kid.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, yeah, but check this out. Yeah, so like as far back as I can remember, I was always reading, always writing. there was nothing else that I didn't necessarily think that it was actually possible, if that makes sense. It was like sort of a twin track thing in my head of that's what I ultimately wanted to do, but I also had some sense that not a lot of people could do that. So I was also sort of, you know, toying with all sorts of, you know, things I could do instead. But yeah, that's what I always wanted to be.
And I think you started out writing for sort of newspapers, websites and magazines. How did you get into that to begin with?
Well, I think I did what a lot of people do, which is do something sort of writing adjacent. So I couldn't even get into journalism at first. So I thought, well, you know, what's sort of next to that, writing in some way in your job. So I did things like freelance copywriting, and I had a little marketing role at my parents' business for a while. And on the side, I did things like data entry. I mean, I did not start. I bit of a sort of, you know, bounced around doing different temp work, different things, and along the side I was always trying to find routes into writing. I did a little the local paper where I lived once used to have like roundups from the neighborhood, so I used to do the roundup from my neighborhood and things like that, and all the while I was like reviewing music for student websites. And then I almost got some freelance work doing reviews for NME, which was a real, like, you know, dream come true, but that didn't quite come true. And sort of partly out of spite, I set up my own music website because no one else would give me actual paid professional experience as a journalist. I set up my own music website, which is called Muso's Guide, which I started in my kitchen. Oh my goodness. Well, my youngest son has just turned my second son has just turned 18, and he was literally a baby when I set it up. So it's a really long time ago. And this was before it was really easy to set up blogs and things. And that was actually my routine. So it was basically giving myself a job, pretending that I knew what I was doing. I was editor, I was chief writer, I was everything. And then gradually got other people sort of roped in to do stuff for me as well. And all of this, making it up as we went along. It was such good fun, such hard work. And I learned so much about, you know, crafting a punchy sentence, a headline, all of this stuff, working with PR companies. I understood how things worked, you know, getting proofs now is not any different to getting sort of CDs sent through I'm sure it's not even CDs anymore, but it was CDs sent through the door. So it was actually a really good grounding in what I went on to do as well. But that was my routine. So every sort of step, it was a bit of a hustle, I suppose, a bit of a side step, and then I started working for a charity in my day job, which was, I had an editorial job at the charity. It was running their website. And from there, and that was sort of a fairly local charity in Oxfordshire. And then from there, I got a job at the Blue Cross Animal Charity in London. So all the while I was sort of getting a bit closer. And then I don't even know how it happened, but I was approached by a recruitment consultant who was looking for somebody to work for at Associated New Media, which is owned Daily Mail online and This Is London and things like that. And not my newspapers of choice by any means, but, you know, quite a sort of step into the journalism world from running a charity website. And yeah, it was writing adjacent, because it was being I think it was a really weird job title. It was something like subscriptions editor or something, but it was basically writing up advertorials. And then I sort of moved across and did a similar thing at the Sun. Again, not my paper of choice, but if you can write things, complicated things, in short and attractive way that will, you know, appeal to a really wide sweep of people, that is a very, very useful skill going forward. So I again did a similar job there, and then I muscled my way into being diet editor there online, and sort of went from there. But I was never that good. I was never that good as a journalist, as an actual sort of being in the newsroom kind of a journalist. I used to get very upset, which isn't ideal. I used to read the news wires looking for, so if people you don't know The Wire as a sort of an ongoing ticker tape of every sort of news story that's being sent in from people like Associated Press from around the country, stories from courts, things like that. And you're sort of going through looking for things that fit your remit. But all the while I was seeing horrendous news stories and, you know, sort of these really sort of, like important stories while I was looking for things about diets and couldn't really square that. And that experience and being in that newsroom, as well as, you know, meeting brilliant people, making lots of friends. When I came to write my debut, Try Not to Breathe, the main character, the protagonist, Alex Dale, she is a freelance journalist who had worked in similar environments. She got a lot higher than me. She'd been really successful, but I shared some of those experiences with her as that all went into that. But I wasn't cut out for anything remotely cutthroat, and I didn't remain in the epicenter of the media, the London media.
But during that time, were you also writing fiction as well?
On and off. I had my first two children very young, so during that time I also had young children, and I was still doing the freelance writing. Living in London, having young children and working in journalism, money is not great. So along the side, I was doing a lot of freelance writing, freelance anything really. Didn't leave a lot of time for anything else. I did start a couple of books, but I didn't really know where I was taking them. And I think the furthest I got through was about halfway with one that, you know, I was really into the premise, but I didn't plan it. I just steamed in and didn't know what genre. I now know it was speculative, but at the time I didn't know anything about genre. I didn't know the marketplace. I didn't know anything, and I ran aground. And I now know that, you know, in its the way that I executed it would not have sold. The protagonist was a 65-year-old man, you know, and at the time I was a 26-year-old woman. You know, I didn't know what I was on about. It wouldn't have sold, and I'm so glad it didn't sell. And then a close friend of mine became a women's fiction author around that time, and I was so proud of her and so jealous. And I thought, oh, okay, so now I know what gets you an agent and what sells. And I had a go at writing women's fiction, or, you know, it was called at the time chick lit. It was horrible. It was such an embarrassing attempt. And I sent I think I sent maybe 2 chapters to her, and she said, like, I love you, but this is horrible. And it was awful. And then I'd been out of the media for a while, and I was mostly freelancing, and I was doing a few different things. I'd worked in online communities, which I loved. And I had a bit more free time, and I had this idea for, I was listening to a health show on Radio 4, because I was, you know, old by then, so I listened to Radio 4. I was like 29 or something. And it was about people who were what was called persistent vegetative states. Is called something different now, but basically similar to a very long-term coma, but they're awake. Their eyes are open, you know, they're there, and they can be in this condition for decades. And one of the families, or possibly one of the nurses who worked with them, these patients, described them as it being a kind of living death. And that phrase, from that point, I just had this immediate idea of a woman who'd been a teenager, who'd been abducted and badly hurt, and went into this kind of condition and was still there 15 years later. And that a journalist who's the same age as her would stumble upon her and recognize her from, you know, the news stories of Bacalog. And it just literally appeared fully formed. And that became the kernel for my debut. And that was 2010. And then it took me about 3 years on and off to write. And that actually came out in 2016. So
that was your first book, wasn't it?
And that was my first book, yeah.
And I had read somewhere that you were talking about finding inspiration, and it sounds like, I think you said that, you know, you can find it anywhere, and it's like a throwaway remark or something in the street or a news story. And And it sounds like your inspiration for that, for your first book, was that kind of news story which you kind of overheard. And is that something important for writers when you're starting off with that idea, is to keep one eye open for anything that might pop up at any point?
Yeah, anything, any snippet. And it's not just sort of the big ideas, it's also character, it's also character traits. In that book, as an example, the Alex Dale, the journalist, and this is probably, been done a million times now, but it hadn't been so much then. She was a functioning alcoholic. And part of where that came from, the way that she functions, is a big part of the book. She would wait until 12 o'clock noon and then she would start drinking. So she had to get all of her work done in the mornings. And that came from, I won't name who it was. There's somebody that I knew who used to drink a lot and used to say once the sun was past the yardstick, they drank a lot. And it was the idea of waiting until noon stuck in my head. And that became a big part of her story. So it's those kind of little remarks as well. But what often my friend Gillian McAllister and she runs the podcast that you mentioned with me. We often say that it's it's really badly put, but the thing plus the thing plus the thing. You'll often have like an idea, but it's not enough by itself. Mm-hmm. And then gradually something else, often quite almost contradictory or very, very different, will come across, and you'll realize that if you put those two things together, that's actually got the texture, beginning to have the texture of a story, but then you need mm-hmm. something else. So the thing plus the thing plus the thing, that is the algorithm that we've come up with. And those things can come from anywhere. It can be it can be a conversation that you've had, or it can be something you've overheard on the bus back when when that was safe, or a film, or a dialogue. Or I spend a lot of time looking at the British newspaper archives online, which are an absolute treasure trove of news stories and concerns and characters. And keeping your eyes and ears open is, I think, vital.
And with Try Not to Breathe, obviously it took you a while to get that draft done, but did you then find an agent quickly, or was it the case of sort of sending out, lots of query letters and going through that process?
I had quite a unique experience, I now know. I'd put together a shortlist, and at the top of the shortlist was an agent who had worked with similar authors, or authors I thought were similar, because you don't really know how to categorize yourself when you're starting. Mm-hmm. But she'd spent time, I think she'd done a couple of talks at the Faber Academy and things like that. And things like that suggested to me that she worked with people who were learning and not just fully formed. Yeah. And I sent my submission to her. I was at home from work. I'd had an operation, so I was recovering, and it was sort of, you often get these pockets of time where you decide to just take a big swing and do something. And I finally did. And I was really, really lucky because she had just sat down to have her lunch when I sent it. So it literally arrived in front of her and she happened to click on it. You can't plan for that. You can't make that happen. There's no, that was a complete fluke. So she replied 45 minutes later. For context, wow. The other person that I had subbed to at the same time, like 5 minutes later, replied something like 4 months later and said, thanks, but it's not for us. So that's, I think, the kind of the broad swing between of the spectrum.
I mean, that's the dream. That's the absolute. I think that's the fastest person we've ever spoken to from submission to signing.
Oh God, I couldn't believe it. I mean, like I say, I was recovering from an operation. I had stitches, and I just got up and ran around my house. Like I just did like a loop, because I didn't know. When a kid has just got this, has big feelings and they don't know what to do with them, so they just go a bit physical. It was like that, because it's not what I was expecting at all. So she asked to see the rest, which I then decided was just not ready at all, and spent all night. I mean, I think I finished at I think I fell asleep about 4 a.m. and still hadn't finished this mad second, third, 20th edit. Finished it in the morning and sent it across, and it still needed enormous amounts of work. The second half especially was definitely not in as good shape as it needed to be, but she said she would, we met, it's a while ago, I'm trying to remember, but we met in London, I think the following week, and she said she would like to represent me. So yes, it worked out very well.
Incredible. And then what was the process to get them published? Was that as quick a process as well, or was there a bit of time?
Yeah. No, well, like I said,
part was done.
Yeah, exactly. It needed an awful amount of work. Yeah. The first half didn't change hugely, but the second half pretty much was completely rewritten. And I know why. It's because I had so much fun setting it up, getting to know the world, putting all these sort of breadcrumbs together and, working out the character, developing the character. And it got to the halfway point and it was like, okay, I need to wrap it up now. I need to, and so from this sort of quite controlled first half where I did feel quite confident, it was like people dashing off, chasing down clues. And, it was just a bit silly. My former agent, the one who took it on, described it as Scooby-Dooing, and it was Scooby-Doo behavior. So it was unpicking that, it was slowing it down, it was being fake it till you make it, pretending to be confident, and rewriting a lot. And the other thing that was needed was, without giving too much away, though it came out 6 years ago, so it's probably fine. One of the character, the girl who'd been trapped in the sort of long-term coma, it opens with her when she was 15. It opens with building up to the point where something happened to her, and then her voice had just disappeared. And that was kind of the missing, the thing plus the thing plus the thing. That was what was missing when we'd gone through so many edits and something still wasn't right. And then we realised that's what it was. And so I put in her voice from her point of view through the years, watching people come and go. Once I'd sort of threaded that missing voice back through, that was when we realised that it was ready. And it still took... By the time we'd actually finished the editing, and my agent at the time was fantastic editorially, just gave me such brilliant notes. Her background she'd been an editor at one point as well, and it was just brilliant, but it was intense. It needed a lot of work. So it was months and months and months. And it was by now August when the whole of publishing goes on holiday in ordinary years. So it was a bit tricky to know. And we decided we'd still go on submission anyway. Because she'd been obviously doing sort of the background work of talking to editors about it and saying that she'd have something coming out. So I went on submission in the August and I got the offer in October. So it was quite a long process. I didn't know if that was long or not, but since meeting other authors, I've understood that is quite a long time.
And it sounds like the whole process was quite collaborative between yourself and your agent in terms of getting notes back, and you worked on the second half of the book and adding this kind of through plot of the character voice throughout it. And obviously you'd worked in kind of editing a long time in your day job before now, but what was it like getting these notes back from your agent? Was it hard to take? Were you reading stuff and thinking that's nonsense, I don't agree with that, and then come back to it, or were you like, no, this is perfect, this is what it needs?
I don't think there's anything I disagreed with. There was often times when I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on why. And obviously, I think I now edit. I do manuscript assessments for authors. I do a lot of that kind of thing. So having now done it so many times, I can spot these things a mile off as well. But back then I couldn't, whereas she'd obviously was so experienced that she could point these things out. So I didn't think there was ever anything I disagreed with. I would get notes back and be disappointed that it wasn't ready to go because I wanted to move on to the next step. But I never looked through and thought, well, you've misunderstood or that's not right. It was like an apprenticeship in how to write a book. It was an apprenticeship in how to edit a book. And I never had to do it like that afterwards because I learned so much. But, I defaulted to an expert as well. I was not an expert in... what would sell to editors or any of that stuff. So it was, in many ways, I'm probably misty-eyed because it's so long ago. But I'm like, oh, it was a wonderful time. I'm sure I cried loads. But no, it was, I'm forever grateful for the work that she did on it.
I find it really interesting that, you'll get agents that will take an author on when there is that amount of work to do on the manuscript that they're sent. You know, I think a lot of people, when they're sending their manuscript in, think this has to be perfect, otherwise I'm never going to find anyone. But that isn't always the case, obviously.
I don't think that's always the case. I think there may be some agents who will only handle stuff that's pretty much good to go straight back out. I think that's the minority. I mean, agents, they're book lovers as well. They know what makes a great book. They are champions of talent. And I think they can see, obviously, if you send something that's a pile of rubbish, that's different. But if you've got a voice and you've got great ideas, but you maybe don't yet fully understand about pacing, that stuff can be learned. So if they can see talent and they can see, a sort of a professional attitude to developing, then no, it doesn't have to be perfect. I don't want to speak for agents, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be good, and it has to have a quality that they're looking for, and they have to believe that they would be able to sell it. I think that's, a sad part of it, is that I was writing something commercial. Some people are writing in a genre that's harder to sell, and if it's harder to sell and it's in bad shape, and maybe that's slightly different, but I think most agents are willing to polish and help and champion.
I just wonder how much it is what side of the scales, if you like. Is it a polish, or is it, do you think it can happen that you can submit to an agent and the agent is like, this isn't going to, this story just isn't working, but this voice in here is good and the writing's good and everything like that, I'd like to work with you? Or do you think there needs to be that kernel of structure and plot that the agent does feel that they can work with to develop with you?
I think it's getting harder. I think competition is fiercer. I've definitely heard, I've interviewed authors or spoken to authors personally who have had that experience where an agent has taken them on for a book that ultimately hasn't sold, but they've then they've worked together on the next one, packaged it better, and it has sold. You definitely hear stories about agents who say this, this book isn't the right one, but I love your voice. But I think it's getting harder and harder. Yeah. Sorry to everybody listening, but it's true, I think.
I think right.
And I wanted to ask about something that we've talked to a few writers about on the show, which is changing agents. And because I know you changed agents in 2018, and yes. I think from everyone that we've spoken to, it's been quite a difficult choice to make, and it's not always a personal thing, but it's what serves the needs of your kind of career best. And I suppose that's the way to look at it. And I kind of wonder what advice you might have for people out there who are wondering if they're happy with the agent they have, or and how to approach that if it's something that they think they need to change.
I think it's more common than people talk about. I think there's no shame in it from the agent side or the writer side. I think that it comes down to this: if you want to have a long career, you are going to change from who you were at the start to who you are at the end. You're going to develop as a writer. You're going to need different things. I often liken it to being a footballer. And when you're in an academy, you need a certain kind of representative. You need somebody who is going to help you get you in there, all the rest of it. When you are a top flight, striker for your, I'm not any of these things, but, if you're at the absolute best and you've been doing it for, 8 years and you're paid a huge amount of money, you need different representatives, you have different needs. And then if you want to move into being a player manager, you need somebody else. It's perfectly normal to need different representation, different advice at different times. And that's what happened with me. It just, what I needed had changed, and I knew it, but because it's such an emotional thing as well, because this is a person, when you've got an agent, they were a gatekeeper for so long, and you're finally through that gate. That's huge. And you don't want to be outside of the gate again. Yeah. So you don't want to make a rash decision. And it's also, you're so grateful. I'm so grateful to my first agent for the work that she did with me as a writer and on my books. And gratitude can really get in the way of making sort of what is essentially a business decision. So it often takes a while I think, for people to actually come to what is a very difficult decision. I do think once you've started to have those thoughts, you probably ultimately will make that decision. And I think the only thing you can do is be really fair and really honest, and really grown up about it. Because like I say, it does happen more than people talk about. And it was painful in some ways. And then it was a relief, because when you've made a difficult decision, when you've actually made it, it's always a relief. And then it was, nerve-wracking, because I didn't know if I would get another agent, or, because sort of etiquette-wise, you don't go looking until you've left. Yeah. And some people don't stick to that, but I wanted to stick to that. I wanted to be really, really, I just wanted to be able to look myself in the eye and know that I'd done it right. But it did mean that I was unagented. And then you start looking. I had a short list of people I was interested in, but there's no guarantee that any of them would take me on. So it was a little bit like.
Is that a different process though from the original search for? I know your original search for agents was quite unique, but barely a search. But is once you are published, once you've had an agent, but you're looking to change, is it the same process, or is it a slightly different process?
It's slightly different, but it's ultimately the same. And what you're ultimately doing is submitting yourself and your work in progress and saying that you would like that representation. What's different is that people to ask, so you can get recommendations. You're more in the world. You've maybe met agents at book launches or something. That wasn't the case for me, actually, because I live in Amsterdam. I don't go to a lot of things, so I wasn't as in the world as a lot of people are, but I was able to get recommendations. I knew which agents I enjoyed on Twitter. I knew who was representing authors that I liked. From getting published now, I read more and more and more. I became much more involved in my writer community. So I was reading more books. I had a better idea of what kind of writer I was and wanted to be, and I could look at who represented those writers that were similar. But it was still a case of reaching out to them. In one case, in the case of the agent I actually went with, I was introduced to her by an author friend who was represented by her. So that obviously made it quicker, because I didn't go to the bottom of the submissions email inbox, but it was still basically the same. The differences were that I could say I had a track record in publishing, whereas when you're first submitting, you don't have that track record, obviously. But I subbed to people who didn't offer to take me on, and I subbed to people who did offer to take me on, and that was a nice position to be in, to be able to choose. Yeah. But it still comes down to similar things, like, do they share your vision? Do they, do you like them? It's a long, involved relationship where you're going to have to trust them. You're going to want their advice. You're going to want their insight. It's a creative partnership and a business partnership. It's quite hard to get right. So it was still a little bit nerve-wracking. But when I met Sophie Lambert, who's my existing, my new, hopefully forever agent, I just felt like, it just relief. I thought, I feel so safe. I feel like this is somebody who understands, we could communicate, we just clicked, and that was just the best feeling. And you can't really, that's an instinctive thing, and it's a gut thing that you don't have necessarily the luxury of listening to when you're first starting, because it is a case of which gatekeepers will let you through. And that's a big difference, I think, doing it as an established author.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I wanted to ask about your writing process as a whole as well. So you've you found the agent, you've got the spark, and you're saying, right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write this book now. And what's your process? I think I read online that you do a lot of research. So I'm assuming you kind of plan out a lot of your stuff before you put pen to paper. It's not, you're not kind of pantsing your way through it. Is that right?
I do now. When I didn't plan, Try Not to Breathe, in so much as I had rough ideas of what I thought would happen, but different idea for who the baddie was and all sorts of stuff like that, and why, and hence a lot had to be unpicked. But also, I think when you're drafting, that's how you find out what the story's actually about. So I do write a first draft, but that first draft needs to be almost thrown away because it's part of the process to finding out who the characters are, what the story is actually about, where the sort of the interesting stuff comes, and where a lot of the sort of twists and jump scares come from is from actually putting your character in certain situations and those opportunities. As an example, the hit list, which is out, well, probably be out now in paperback when this goes out, but there's a particularly sort of scary moment where the main character Marianne is cornered somewhere, and that wasn't in an original plan, but taking her to the place I took her presented that opportunity, and it's now a very pivotal part. But that wasn't in the first version. That was in the third, probably the third version. And so my process basically is getting the nub of the idea and then interrogating it, asking questions like, is it enough? It's often not enough. It often needs, like I said earlier, those extra layers that add that richness. I start sort of tooling around with it, thinking about, so with the case of the hit list, the idea that came to me was the idea of finding your name on a hit list and no idea why or who put it there. And it was, I decided it was a hit list on the dark web, because if it was on the main internet, it'd be very easy to go to the police and for them to look up who owned it, and it would probably be a prank and go, so on. So already you're sort of giving yourself parameters by exploring what's possible, what's plausible. And then you start thinking, well, my books have to be a relatable person that readers can recognize themselves in, or at least believe exists and would operate in the same world as them. So it couldn't be, a gun trader who's on the dark web selling guns, because these aren't the people that we have in our lives, and that wouldn't be relatable. So it had to be a normal person who is shocked to find themselves on this list. So from there you're basically kind of building up these layers and asking yourself these questions all of the time, like, but why would a normal person even be on the dark web? So then you've got it's sort of a series of steps to sort of plan out. So from there, I start doing a sort of a plot plan and making sure, like I said, that it lasts a whole book. It's 90,000 words, 100,000 words, a lot of book. And you have to give people a lot for their time and attention. They have to just really have to keep turning the pages. So there has to be a lot of activity. So it takes some planning. So then I plan it all out sort of in an Excel spreadsheet or on a whiteboard. And then I do something which I actually got from James Patterson, not personally. I watched his masterclass. I don't know him, but he describes that he literally writes the stories from start to finish. Not writes the book, but writes the story. This happened and this happened and this happened, so that you can get this document. And by the end of it, he says he wants people to go, well, that was a great story. I can't wait to read the book. That you have everything that happens in there. So I do that. I do that long form so that I have quite a chunky, like I've just done an outline and plan, and it's like 20,000 words or something. Like it's just a monster. Yeah. But it's everything that's in there. So this is wildly different to when I was planning Try Not to Breathe, or not planning Try Not to Breathe, which was like a note on my phone with a few ideas. This is very different. And then you start writing it, and then you realize where the snags are, and you realize what's not going to work, and you around sort of halfway, I find I'm no longer looking at the plan. It's still there sort of in my head, and if I get lost I can look at it, but I have to go through that process to kind of lock it into my brain, and then I start actually writing it. And then that first draft will never see light of day. It will always need to be massively rewritten. But like I say, that's when I then work out who the characters really are and what it's really about. It's a long process with a lot of waste. There's a lot of wastage in writing a good book. You have to chuck a lot of stuff away, I think.
Yeah. And are you someone then that tries to get that first draft done and fully in the knowledge that I'm going to rework this, I'm going to change this? Or when you're writing it, do you try and revise it and fix bits as you're going, or do you just want to get to the end of that draft?
No, I do fix bits as I'm going. I do write fast. I mean, my background was online journalism, where your deadline's an hour. It's you don't have a year to write anything. So I am quite used to writing fast, and I am quite used to being flexible and sort of reactive. That said, like, I couldn't go on if I know, oh God, I'm going to have to completely pull this character out. I couldn't carry on writing that character. But if I know that a setting is a bit dull, I don't necessarily stop to change it at the point. I just make a note of that, and I come back to that. So a mixture of both. But a lot of it's through learning. I know now that this is a long process where I am going to mess up. I am going to chuck stuff away. So I can sort of go through it knowing that. Whereas when you're first doing it, you're trying to get it perfect. Yeah. And that's a huge amount of pressure to put on yourself, that it's just impossible. It's just impossible. There is no perfect first draft. I don't believe it.
And Scrivener's a software that I know you use, or you've liked to use, and I know Mark and myself use it as well, and we're big fans of it. And I wondered, I mean, it's quite a daunting piece of software. It's great for moving stuff around, chapters around, and plotting and planning stuff, but it's quite huge. And for someone who's new to it, I certainly found it quite overwhelming when I first started to use it. And I wondered what your tips and tricks are for Scrivener for people who might be using or thinking about using it. My
main tip is to not worry if you don't use everything or even most of it. I probably only scratched the surface, but what I do with it works for me. I am really bad at ever reading instructions, recipes, watching tutorials. Like, I just don't. But this is the one example where I actually went through the tutorial, and I definitely recommend doing that, because it's not always super intuitive. If you're used to, say, Apple products, or you've always used Microsoft Word or something, you expect certain things, and it's a new piece of software. It's neither of those. But once you get into it, it's really useful, especially if you have multiple voices. I find, I think if you're doing a one voice, first person sort of hero's journey, start to finish, maybe just doing it in one document is easier, but that's not what I do. There's almost always more than one voice, or there's different times and, all the rest of it. So I find it very useful. I just use the folders as chapters and the scenes within them, nothing more fancy, and use it to sort of move around. And when I first started using it, I tried to sort of use the notes facility. You can put it, and I don't bother with any of that now, because it wasn't what I wanted it for, but I think that could be really useful for lots of people. And then when I have drafted it all in Scrivener, I then just export it out as a doc. Because even though, I use a Mac, but publishing uses Windows and Microsoft, so I always put it as a doc, so it will look the same way as whoever's going to read it in the end. And then I read it in that document, and then I will often do my second, like I'll do a structural edit in Scrivener by rebuilding from scratch, but copying things across. But once I'm sort of a bit further on, I then switch to doing it just in the one document. When it's a case of moving sentences rather than chapters, then I'll keep it in one document.
And when you've got multiple voices in the book, do you write in a linear manner, so you're switching between those voices during the drafting, or do you sometimes try and continue one person's story and then sort of jigsaw it back together?
Yeah, because they will often be a call and response to each other, I have to do it in a linear way, generally. In the hit list, the first part, careful I give away, but the first part, the majority of the voice is Marianne, the woman who finds her name on a hit list, but there is interspersed with chapters from another point of view. But they're generally quite short, and they do, like I say, they are a call and response. So I had to do that in one go. And in the second part of the book, there are 2 voices, 3 voices, trying to remember now, which are, each one has quite equal weighting, quite equal billing. No, there's 2 voices. Oh God, don't even know where to put 2 voices, but they're more equal. And I did write them more in chunks because the flow for a while doesn't necessarily, it's not call and response in the same way. So I prefer to stay really in the voice, and they're quite unique voices. So in answer, I do everything. I do all of it. I'm not consistent.
When you're doing the editing, is it easier to get that consistency of voice? Do you read it in a linear way, or do you try and say, right, here's Marianne's parts. Does this all sound consistent? Does it fit together?
No, then I read it like a reader.
Right,
so I will only read it from beginning to end, left to right. Because otherwise you see what you want to see, which is really dangerous, I think. So, I try to put it away for a little bit between drafts, which ends up being about like 2 days. But otherwise, because you then sort of do see what you want to see. But I read it as a reader, and actually as sort of in the later editing stages, because I edit several rounds, a lot, I will then switch to reading it on a Kindle, or a Kindle app on a tablet, and I read it as a reader in a whole new way. Then you see different things, you often spot typos, little bits, and just the pace and the flow and the kind of rhythm of things. You're reading it, especially rhythm. Actually, that's something that at that stage, reading it in that format really helps me to recognize when it's a bit, it doesn't quite work, it's a bit sluggish. So I try to switch it up and not just do it all one way.
And you mentioned it a few times now, but your new book is The Hit List, which I know came out in ebook last year and paperback this month. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the book for those that haven't read it yet?
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Well, as I've already shown, I'm really bad at pitching my books. But so The Hit List essentially is a woman. The premise is, what would you do if you found your name on a hit list and you had no idea who put it there or why? And it opens with Marianne. She's a fairly recent widow. It's the anniversary of losing her husband. She's just started a tentative new relationship, but on special sort of or difficult days, she will often spend time with her late husband's things. She'll wear his shirt. She'll look at old love letters and things like that. And this is what she does that night. But she looks through her emails from him, their email conversations, and then it doesn't go back far enough. So she drags out his dusty old laptop and she starts looking through his things. And that's dangerous because, I wouldn't want anybody necessarily to look through old, years old emails from before they knew me. I think that changes a person's concept of you, but that's what she does. And from there, she ends up finding out things that trouble her and confuse her and upset her about her husband. And this is also the time when she discovers that he was going on the dark web, which is a surprise in itself. She's a secondary school teacher, which is the only reason she knows that even such a thing exists, is because obviously they've done safeguarding training, and she teaches teenagers who brag about things that they haven't really seen. And so this is how she sort of recognizes what it is, knows it's a bad thing, and clicks anyway. And from there, it starts a cat and mouse between her and a dark web assassin who is genuinely trying to get her. And for a while, obviously, she doesn't really believe it's true, because you wouldn't. So she spends some time looking at the other names that are on the list, and gradually it becomes clear that she might actually be in peril. And I don't want to say any more because I'll give it away. I don't list out the whole thing, but yeah.
Nice.
And obviously, certainly the ebook came out in lockdown, and we're hopefully opening up and coming out of lockdown now. But has that made a difference compared to your past book launches? Obviously, it must have made a big difference in terms of how it happened.
Yeah, so different. And it's slightly different for me. I really, really feel for people whose debuts have come out in this, because that you're never going to get that debut again. You can have 8 more book launches, but you'll never have that debut again. So I don't feel particularly sorry for myself. I feel sorry for those people, but it certainly was different. I live in Amsterdam, So it's never been easy to just pop into a bookshop and see my book anyway. So in a way, it's not wildly different in that respect, so on a day-to-day sense, but I couldn't have a party. I did like an Instagram live with Jilly, ordered myself a cake with my book cover on it and ate it by myself rather than cut it in front of friends and family. But besides that, it's a really weird time because all of the usual rules go out the window. Nobody could go to a bookshop and buy any of the books. Ordinarily I sell a lot of books through the W.H. Smiths at the airports. Airports were closed, so it made a lot of sense to do ebook and audio first rather than keep moving the date as a lot of people did. I mean, publishers really had to scramble to work out how to do it, to not clog up the future kind of schedules, and make everything come out. And then we had that sort of bonkers day, didn't we? Which I think was that in August actually, where loads of things came out on? No, it was September.
September, I think.
Just after, I'd just come out before that, and then I think it was maybe even the following week where there was 600 odd books, all traditionally published books, all out on the same day. Because I mean, nobody knew how to do it. But I'm very glad that my paperback's out on the 15th of April, and bookshops have just reopened. So I'm sure it's not going to be in any way the usual kind of footfall, and that's fine. But I am glad that at least I might get the odd photo of my book in the wild.
And you also run a podcast with your fellow author, who you've mentioned a few times, Gillian McAllister, called Honest Authors. And I wonder if you could chat a little bit about that, and why you started up in the first place. And you've got a lot of episodes out there, and it's a kind of helpful guide for finding agents and getting out there and stuff, and how you come up with new ideas for every episode as well. Sure.
Well, I mean, it mostly started because we didn't know what we were doing, but we were asking each other, which isn't necessarily a particularly good route for success when neither of you knows. I'd had one book out, and Jilly she was about to release her first, and we'd got talking over Twitter, as is often the case. She'd asked me to read her proof, and I'd been really snooty about it, well, I'm really busy, but send it. And then her editor sent it to me, and I opened it just to check it was working, and started reading it, and basically read it non-stop. I was on holiday at the time and read it non-stop, and was like, oh, this book's fantastic. So from that, we started talking, and as she was getting closer to her publishing date, she was asking me more and more questions, and I was like, I don't actually know. So we decided that lots of authors don't know, because why would you know when you've not done it before? So originally it was sort of aimed at talking about the experience of being a debut author. But as we obviously then published more and more books and learned more, it became much more about the whole experience of being a traditionally published author. And I mean, really, in terms of coming up with ideas, it's what do we want to know? And what did we want to know? And what are people asking us? There's so much mystique and so much lingo and so many gatekeepers. And when you have finally got some interest and you've finally got an agent or you have got an offer, you're so scared to do anything to ruin it that even you don't want to ask questions. I certainly didn't. I wanted to pretend that I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew all of the abbreviations, but why would I? Because I'm not of that world. So we realized that a lot of people were holding their breath and not asking questions. So we asked each other the questions, or we got a lot of authors on to talk through their journeys to publication. And then we sort of branched out and did I think it was season 3, we did experts, a focus on experts, and we interviewed editors, and we interviewed publicity directors, and just came at it from that point of view. And that was the one that really made a big difference, actually, and got a lot of new listeners and a lot of attention. And we'll keep doing it for as long as we've got questions we want answered, really. But it's kind of therapy. It's such a strange job, and it's such a privilege, but that doesn't mean it's always perfect and always, it's actually such an emotional thing because you're pouring so much of yourself into what is essentially a product, and that's kind of a curious life to lead. So it's been really useful to kind of process that weirdness by talking about it. So we are very honest, and we do talk about sort of the stresses and the anxieties and the weird things you do. And so far people seem to like it. So
Excellent podcast to listen to alongside this one, perhaps. And I also saw that you're a member of the International Thriller Writers group. I mean, how did that come about, and how does that help with your sort of brand and everything?
To be completely honest, I just noticed that some other thriller authors were members and joined. And that's about it. But it's useful to see what other people are doing. It's also useful, I think, to get an international sense. A lot of the people who are particularly big in my genre are either based in America or their primary market is America. So like Lee Child's British, but he lives in America and his primary market is America. And I think that I want to be to put it bluntly, like I want to do this for as long as possible, and I want to be really, really good at it. And that involves being professional, and it involves lifelong learning. And I try to educate myself, and I try to stay aware of what other people are doing and what the market is doing, and try to, because it is a creative pursuit. But if the business side isn't there, if they're not selling, no one's going to keep giving me book deals. And it's not just about, exercising my creativity as sort of, maybe that doesn't sound very, maybe that's a bit depressing to hear for some, but that is the case. It is a business.
Yeah.
So I do try to just keep learning and educating myself, and being a part of, as many sort of organizations and going to as many events as possible, online and offline, is a way to do that, really.
I think that's a really good point, because I think so many people get this idea in the head that it's primarily about what you want to write and sharing your story with the world, and ultimately, there does have to be a trade-off, I suppose, between what you want to say and write and what people are willing to read and pay for, and I think you do have to sacrifice is maybe the wrong word, but give up a little bit of your whole complete creative control in order to say, actually, these guys know what sells, and if I want to make a living of this, I need to sell. And it's not a bad thing. Selling books isn't a bad thing. And
no.
You've still got plenty of space to be creative and stuff, and do it in a way that's marketable and sells well, etc.
Yeah, it's not a sacrifice, but it is a compromise. I think that if you want to have total creative freedom, self-publish. We have more avenues for getting stories out now than we've ever had before. Write and produce a podcast. If you don't want to sort of be set by other people's parameters, like all power to your elbow, you've actually got more opportunities now to do that than ever.
Yeah.
But I am not somebody who can do all of the things needed to do that. I need an editor. I need somebody who understands sales. I want to be a traditionally published author for various reasons, including that I don't have the expertise to do it another way.
Yeah.
And I think that, you do have this idea that you can just come up with stories. Once you're an author, once you're in, then you can just keep producing stories. And that's not totally the case. You do still have to, for example, you could be working on something that your publisher is already publishing something really similar to that. You need to know that. So you need their input before you start writing. And it can be frustrating because you want to just get going. But ultimately it's worth it. She says through gritted teeth, because I hate doing outlines and synopses, but it is important, really.
And what's next? You said you just finished outlining a new book, I think.
Well, yeah. So I finished the next book, so the book that's going to come out after the hit list. That's now gone through all of its major edits and is just, I think next month I'm going to get the copy edits, which are things like the date's wrong and there's a typo and that kind of sort of nitty gritty stuff. So in my head, that book is finished. So now I'm just trying to, negotiate with my publishers what to write next. So this is the outlining stage. With the hit list, I moved to a new publisher. So this is sort of the first time that I've done this with this publisher. So I really want to get it right. It's slightly nerve-wracking. But so I've just done another go at an outline, which I sent to my agent. So I'm waiting to see what she thinks of it. I might email you afterwards and say, can you edit this out because you said it's horrible. But yeah, this is all part of the process.
So presumably the hit list and the book you just finished writing was a 2-book deal with your new publisher. So like, how does it work with your next one then? Is it a sense of, I'll tell you what my pitch is, and if you like it, you can sign me on for 2 more books? Or is it a case of write the book and then we'll see?
Hopefully I'll tell you what I'd like to write and hopefully get it. I mean, nothing's a foregone conclusion unless you're really, I think it's harder than ever. So I think you have to be quite established in a relationship for anything to be a foregone conclusion. But no, they haven't asked me to write the whole book and then we'll see. But they do understandably want, a good grasp of what it will be, just to make sure that there's full buy-in. Because this is the thing as well, like you need to make a success of a book, you need the marketing team to be really excited about marketing it. You need the sales team to really feel that they can get it into the right places to sell it. The publicity team to believe that it's the kind of story that they can pitch to, media outlets. So it is important, as much as it can slightly clip your wings, it is actually important that all these people give their feedback. And actually, I like having some parameters. This one of the reasons that I love writing genre fiction, because you have parameters to play with. I'd be really quite nerve-wracked if I could write anything that I want in any form, in any genre, in any style. I was like, where do you start? I need some parameters. So, yeah.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book I read, kind of fittingly, was The Reacher Guy by Dr. Heather Martin. So it's a biography of Lee Child, which is fascinating. It was absolutely jammed with like writing advice and all of that inspiration, but it was also really interesting, sort of the making of the man, really. So I would highly recommend it.
Excellent.
Nice. And what about the last film that you watched?
The last film I watched and enjoyed.
More fun than one you didn't enjoy.
Oh yeah, that was bonkers actually, but I can't remember the name. But the last film I watched and enjoyed was Palm Springs.
All right, yeah.
I was
Andy
just Samberg,
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just brilliant. It was it's funny, but yeah, just watch it. It's really, and it was the perfect 1 hour 30 minutes that all films should be.
Oh yes, I have to say I definitely am a fan of that 90-minute sweet spot when it's not going to be we watched Endgame, the Avengers film, and we ended up watching over like 2 nights because it's over 3 hours long, and in one go I was like, I'm actually getting quite tired. And the pause to go to the toilet and stuff ends up being about 3.5 hours.
I went to the cinema to see that, and I actually booked myself. There's a gorgeous cinema in Amsterdam that has love seats. And But you have to you buy 2 tickets. I bought myself 2 tickets. I went without my kids. I went by myself in the day, and I lay on the sofa and watched it. And that's the only way you can watch a 3-hour film.
Could have been worse. Could have been Zack Snyder's Justice League. 4 hours. 4 hours long.
No, I'm tapping out. I'm not doing that one.
And what's the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
Line of Duty.
Yeah,
we can get that here. It's like our Sunday routine is we watch it in bed. It's the only linear TV we watch because we don't watch Dutch TV.
I've heard it's much improved over last season, which I wasn't a massive fan of last series, but I've heard this one's step up. Is that right? Would you agree?
Do you know what? I don't know if I'm just swept away by excitement or if it's good, and I don't mind because I just really enjoy watching it.
Nice. Well, the very, very last thing we do is a quick fire either or, and there's no right answers apart from one, but we'll get to that later on. And
Okay.
First one, I'll go for it. It's 2 authors. I know that you said that you like Agatha Christie or Kate Atkinson.
Agatha Christie.
Oh, yes.
TV or cinema?
TV.
Night owl or early bird?
I am now an early bird, and I don't like it, but I think I'm stuck with it.
Fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Takeaway.
And the last one, real book or ebook?
Oh, real book, I think.
I'm
Yeah.
afraid that was the incorrect answer for that last one there.
Tarek's a big ebook advocate.
What's
You know,
your-
I am too. I honestly am, and it's
Everyone always says this when I tell them. Everyone's always, oh yeah, no, I love ebooks. Actually. I'll think about it. I just remembered it. It's my favorite.
It's really difficult because ebooks are where I've done the best. I was an ebook success before I was a paperback success, so I have a lot of affection. But my bookcases are my pride and joy. So I love actually having. So it's more.
I do love the look of the
aesthetic.
bookshelves. Yeah. I would be happy to buy a book and maybe like a hardback, and you get an ebook for free. You said
Yeah,
this
we
before,
should
some
do
kind
that.
of like deal. I would.
I
Get
do
more
that
folk to
often,
buy
actually.
hardbacks,
Yeah, I often do that. If I read something in ebook and love it, I want that physical artifacts, and I'll then buy it. Yeah.
I saw a horrifying photo in, I think it was an IKEA catalogue, and it was the bookshelves, and they were recommending that you store the books back to front so the pages face out.
That. I know.
And I was like, how would you ever find it?
Why were they recommending?
It was just like it was a bookshelf advert, but all the books in the bookshelves they had in the magazine were pages that facing out.
Yeah.
It was
Because it was all about the neutral colour.
Yeah, that was
it.
it. That was it.
Yeah.
What, that's just like a mentalist.
Yeah.
Psychopath would have the book stored like that.
Yeah, that is definitely a red flag. I would leave that house.
Exactly. I will just repeat that anyone who places their books back to front on a bookshelf is probably some kind of psychopath.
I mean, I don't believe anyone actually does that. It was clearly done for a photograph in an IKEA catalogue and nothing else.
If you are someone who likes to put their books back to front, can you please send us an email so we know never to approach you in the street?
Exactly. And she mentioned Palm Springs there as well. I just watched that, and it's a really good, fun film.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah. Probably the less you know about it, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, which I didn't realize when I watched it, there's a post-credit scene.
Yeah, I told you about that. Yeah.
which addresses one of the problems I had with the film, I think. So I need to actually go back and watch that.
It's not even post-credits. It's like 5 minutes into 5 seconds into the credits. You must have stopped it.
I switched the TV off the second the last word is said. It goes off. I have no time for credits whatsoever.
Yeah, but thanks very much to Holly for coming on the podcast there. It was a really interesting chat, and that story about how she got her agent is pretty incredible.
That's a dream.
It is, yeah.
It's a dream.
Send it before lunch.
Part of me wonders if she wasn't maybe doing like a Jason Bourne, be outside the window. She's just curling up with the sandwich and a bottle of Coke. So just send the email.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, that is the dream that because you always imagine, and I think it is what happens most of the time, is that your email goes to the bottom of a very, very long list. So for it to be picked up and read so quickly is incredible. And also interesting what she was saying about changing agents, because, once you've got an agent, if you're wanting to be a writer, that's a big milestone. And it's a lot of effort most of the time, Holly's story notwithstanding, to get one. And to then change an agent is a big step, and it must be quite scary. It's almost like going back to square one again.
Yeah, I think that's right. When you spend so long trying to find someone, to the thought of them going back out in the cold alone again it's a daunting one, and it's one that I think every author probably has to consider at some point and saying, is this the correct path that I'm on, etc. And it's a brave move, but everyone that we've chatted to who's done it in the past has always said that it's been for the better.
Yeah, definitely. And as Holly said, some agents will help you start out in your career. Some agents will help boost your career forward. It can be that you need different people for these different aspects of your career.
That's a really good point. It's not always about acrimonious split.
No, exactly.
As you say, it's a what kind of help do I need in my part of the career path that I'm on right now, and that is an important question to ask yourself, for sure. Definitely.
Well, you can pick up the hit list in a bookshop, as we mentioned. now that's allowed, certainly in the UK. So thanks very much to Holly for coming on to the podcast, and do check out her own podcast that we discussed there, Honest Authors, because that's a really useful podcast as well, and a great one to listen to alongside this one, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a complimentary podcast.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And that was going, because this is episode 10, we were going to end the season there, a nice round number, but we do have a special extra bonus guest next week.
We do indeed. Our bonus episode is a really exciting chat with Nina Allen, who is a sci-fi author. She's won the BSFA, the British Science Fiction Award, for her work. It's a really fun chat we have with her, and I think it's a really excellent episode.
Yeah, really interesting. And actually, she's got a really unique redrafting method that we discussed as well.
That's right.
So yeah, it's a really good episode. So hope you tune in for that one. Before we go, as always, I'll ask that if you enjoyed the episode, if you could take a couple of seconds to give us a rating and review, if possible, on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use, because that always helps us continue to get great guests. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page One, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.